Hurricane Irma, Cuba faces period of darkness and rebuilding. Updated at 11:50 p.m. ET. Irma, once a powerful and long-running hurricane, weakened to a tropical depression as it moved through Georgia on its way to Alabama. It continues to dump heavy rain, but all surge warnings have been canceled. Irma has left behind dangerous floodwaters, power outages for millions of people, and the debris it has made of human possessions across Florida. The huge storm remained a Category 1 hurricane through early Monday, before finally being downgraded to a tropical storm and then a tropical depression. As of 11 p.m. ET, Irma bears maximum sustained winds of about 35 miles per hour, moving at 15 miles per hour, 5 miles south of Columbus, Georgia. Electric companies report more than 1.4 million customers in Georgia are without power. At least 3 people have died in Florida from causes related to Irma, NPR has confirmed, 2 law enforcement officers, Hardee County Deputy Julie Bridges and Department of Corrections Sergeant Joseph Ossman, as well as 1 unidentified individual in Miami-Dade County. NPR has confirmed 2 deaths in Georgia. Overall, the Associated Press is reporting more than 40 people have died from Irma's effects. More than 6.2 million homes and businesses in Florida are currently without power, state officials say. As the sun rose Monday, many Floridians anxiously began to assess the damage wrought by the hurricane, either inspecting their houses and neighborhoods for themselves or contacting those who stayed behind. For those caught in Irma's path, and wondering what to do after it passes, member station WLRN in Miami has assembled a guide to help. Irma was a hurricane for part of 12 days, having been dubbed a hurricane on August 31, when it was far from land in the Atlantic Ocean. 4 days. It was a Category 5 storm, wreaking havoc in the Caribbean, where recovery efforts are still underway. On Monday morning, the storm brought storm surge risks as high as 4 to 6 feet above normal water levels in parts of Florida. Irma was also extending tropical storm force winds outward up 415 miles, the National Hurricane Center says. The perilous storm and the massive evacuation it sparked were reflected in an unusual scene in Florida early Monday, when the state's skies were empty of airliners. A screenshot taken by journalist Sam Sweeney shows, as he wrote, "Not a single airplane over the state of Florida." By mid-afternoon Monday, more than 14,000 flights to or from the Caribbean and Florida had been canceled, according to FlightAware. Hurricane Jose, which had shadowed part of Irma's route toward the Leeward Islands, has stalled well east of the Bahamas. As of 11 p.m. ET, when it arrived in Florida, Irma was more than 400 miles wide. Consider that when it made landfall at the bottom of Florida's peninsula on Sunday, Irma's thick bands of rain were already drenching parts of northern Florida and southern Georgia. Hurricane Irma made landfall twice in Florida on Sunday, smacking into the Florida Keys as a Category 4 storm before moving over water and hitting Marco Island as a Category 3 on Florida's southwest coast. All told, Moody's Analytics estimates the economic cost of Irma could reach as high as $92 billion. Here are some of the stories we're seeing in Florida. Florida Keys, from a flyover aboard a Coast Guard C-130 airplane, NPR's Connor Donovan saw extensive damage to the Keys, particularly in Marathon Island. Houses were wrecked, roofs ripped off. Mobile home parks in particular were devastated, with trailers flipped over and tossed around. Boats were capsized, and many had broken free of their moorings and been thrown ashore. A few cars were driving on the streets, including a solitary vehicle traveling west from Marathon along the 7-mile bridge. In a driving tour of the area surrounding Naval Air Station Key West, Connor saw many roads remain blocked by trees and downed power lines. Less sturdy buildings had lost roofs or had doors blown in. At a gas station, the canopy and pumps were crumpled into a heap. Key West was still without power, water and cell service. But there were a number of civilians driving and walking around the island, which is under a sundown to sunup curfew. Republican Rep. Carlos Curbelo, whose district includes the Keys, said, "It's clear that there's a lot of work to be done and this community's going to need a lot of support. There's some logistical challenges with getting goods and services down to the Florida Keys." Earlier he had called for a robust funding plan for FEMA and said Congress can't fund FEMA month to month. Thousands of people are believed to have resisted mandatory evacuation orders to stay in the Keys. Jacksonville. The city has seen bad flooding, as the St. Johns River overflowed its banks, and Mayor Lenny Curry said he sees recovering from the flooding as probably a week-long event. The sheriff's office reported Monday evening that the number of customers without power is down to 177,652. Online. People in the hurricane's path are using a Facebook group to check in and mark themselves as safe, with nearly 400,000 people in the group as of Monday morning, offering peace of mind to loved ones and giving a hint at this storm's reach. Members of the group also used it to commiserate, share tips and vent their feelings about Irma. As the sun rose Monday, they also shared some of what they're seeing. A sample, from Davenport, in Central Florida, where Benjamin McKinney wrote, "Walked around to check out my yard. The neighbor's screen patio was torn off and is laying in the street. The stop sign on the corner is missing. The neighbor behind us fence is down. We're missing some pieces from our roof overhang. Our bougainvillea bush was uprooted and pulled our fence out. Nothing too crazy." Tampa. As the storm approached, it sucked water out of Tampa Bay and other areas, prompting curious residents to head out onto the muddy ground, and, in at least one case, to rescue stranded manatees. But damage to the city was minimal, according to a relieved Mayor Bob Buckhorn, who the Associated Press quoted as saying Monday became a good day. Orlando. From member station WMFE, Florida Highway Patrol said they're seeing too many people outside seeing and not obeying the curfew. FHP reports trees are down and there's standing water from the exit ramps at 528 to 520. Those ramps have been closed in both directions. FHP says traffic's starting to build up on 95 and the turnpike southbound. They expect traffic to pick up as the day goes on and people want to go home and check out their property. Officials say people can't enter the Keys, so evacuees need to stay put. Miami. The city is focusing on clearing roads of debris, trees, and sand. In some areas, parts of the beach have been pushed over roadways. Mayor Tomas Regalado said 72% of the city of Miami is currently without power. NPR's Hansi Lo Wang reports. Police report at least 26 looting incidents, with 13 arrests made. At one time, Miami was dead in the center of the track, and could have been hit very hard, NPR's John Hamilton says on Morning Edition. But today, John says, much of the city looks surprisingly normal, at least out toward the airport. "I have seen a whole lot of power trucks going by on the freeway out here," John adds. "There's still water on the ground in places. They're picking up plots of palm fronds, but the city looks like it's getting back in business." Miami International Airport saw wind gusts near 100 miles per hour and sustained significant water damage throughout, the airport director, Emilio Gonzalez, said via Twitter. The facility is closed to passenger flights at least through Monday. "This didn't even happen during the so-called storm of the century in 1993, said Yaritza Mendoza, the floodwaters lapping around her knees. "We've never seen the water reach Linnea before." For those not familiar with the beautiful Havana district of Vedado, the street name of Linnea might not mean much, but for residents of the Cuban capital it is one of the city's reference points. For days, much of this most treasured neighborhood has been submerged. Hurricane Irma brought water and debris crashing over the seawall of the Malecón, Havana's waterfront boulevard, and into the district's Art Deco and modernist buildings. Once the storm surge hit Linnea, it was some 6 blocks up from Malecón. Ground floor apartments were inundated, possessions ruined, and entire livelihoods were put at risk among those running small businesses from their homes. The streets of Vedado briefly became canals. With the emergency services going from home to home by boat to rescue the elderly and infirm. In that regard, Yaritza, who lives on the 10th floor of a building on Linnea, considers herself fortunate. "Thanks to God, I've not heard of anyone that has died, but there have been very big material losses," she says, her children wading through the fetid water in bare feet or flip-flops. Then, as we are speaking, a forensic team arrives to remove the body of Nieves Martinez, an 89-year-old whose body was found floating in the waters outside her home. It was a tragic and timely sign of what the government would later confirm via state media. There were 10 deaths in Cuba as a result of Hurricane Irma. Elsewhere in the city, In the much poorer district of Centro Habana, Yolanda's Castillo and Maria del Carmen Argoitia, both aged 27, died when a fourth-floor balcony collapsed on a bus in which they were traveling. As many local residents make their way through floods to get in and out, Havana remains a city largely in the dark. The fear is that it could take weeks for the power to be fully returned. All of this, and Hurricane Irma really only grazed Havana. The areas further east, which were directly under the eye of the storm, were devastated, particularly the fishing village of Ciberian and the outlying keys such as Cayo Coco. Images released by state media show the roof of the international airport in Cayo Coco caved in. Incredibly, visitors were flying into that airport as recently as Wednesday, just a day before the key was evacuated in a convoy of buses. Gil Wilkinson from Nottinghamshire was among them. "It was truly frightening," says Gil, adding, "They really should have got us out earlier. We saw the Canadians leave, the Argentines leave, and we were all sitting at hotel and with no one telling us anything." Now in a hotel in Verdero, a resort much closer to Havana, she is part of a group of British holidaymakers who are fuming at their travel agent, Thomas Cook, and the British Foreign Office. "The Cuban people were the only ones who've actually looked after us," said Angelique Wood, another stranded visitor from Derby. Thomas Cook has defended itself, saying the company followed the Cuban government's emergency instructions to the letter. Meanwhile, the British Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, described as completely wrong the criticism that the UK government's response to the crisis in the Caribbean was slow or inept. Still, no one should confuse matters. Hurricane Irma in Cuba is not about disgruntled holidaymakers, no matter how difficult the past few days have been for them. It is about the families of Nieves Martinez, Yolanda's Castillo, Maria del Carmen Argoitia and 7 others. It is about entire communities wondering how they are going to rebuild when they were among some of the poorest on the island in the first place. It is about swaths of Cuba facing uncertain months ahead, possibly trying to cope in the dark. The rebuilding of key infrastructure will take time and money that simply doesn't exist. President Raúl Castro praised the Cuban people for their response to the disaster so far and promised to reconstruct after the damage. In these difficult circumstances, of greatest importance is the unity between Cubans, the solidarity between neighbors, and the discipline before the instructions emitted by the National Civil Defense and the Defense Council at every level, he wrote in a letter to the nation. Yaritza Mendoza will also be turning to another power. "We just have to have faith that God is going to help us," shaking her head at her flooded neighborhood. Digital Globe released images taken over the northern Leeward Islands, the Virgin Islands, parts of Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, the Turks and Caicos, and Great Inagua Island taken September 8 to 10. Here is a sampling of some of the features we noticed in this imagery. Codrington, Barbuda. According to UNISAT, 88% of structures in Barbuda were possibly damaged, representing over 1,000 buildings. Barbuda Coastal Cuts. In a statement on September 6, Barbuda and Antigua's Prime Minister Gaston Brown said catastrophic damage left parts of the Caribbean practically uninhabitable. Storm runoff. Vegetation stripped. Many of the post-storm images show vegetation stripped by the Category 5 hurricane as it nailed the northern Leeward Islands, Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos, and Great Inagua Island.